Evictions, how expensive and problematic they are. That's the topic for today's episode, and without further ado, let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. For those who are tuning in for the first time, this is your channel for real estate education. So today's topic is about eviction, and I don't mean to make it controversial, but things do happen when it comes to real estate investing, and one of them turns out to be evictions, right? And I know this is a very difficult subject to talk about, especially given the crisis, especially given everything that's going on with the coronavirus. But at the end of the day, this is business and everybody gets impacted. And I know most people tend to think about the tenant, right? The family who's been evicted, who's been placed out on the street, but people seem to forget the other side of the equation, right? For real estate investors, that also becomes something that is difficult and challenging to deal with. Why? Because real estate investors, they have mortgage they have to pay, they have insurance they have to pay, they have to pay property taxes, they have to pay their property manager, and the list goes on, right? But the reason why I decided to create this episode is not to defend the real estate investors or to say poor family. It's just basically give you some level of transparency as to what goes into the equation of an eviction. And without further ado, let's just quickly dive into the board. So let's draw a quick timeline here. So we have this timeline, and we have day 1, we have day 5, and we have day 7, right? And for those who are wondering what this means, it's just a simple timeline. I've actually never evicted any of my tenants before, but my property managers, they have evicted people in the past. I mean, my properties are not the only ones that they manage. So I actually reached out to one of them and I asked them about the eviction process this time around in Alabama. So he was kind enough to walk me through the entire process. Now, depending on the state that you reside, the eviction process might be different, but this is in essence what goes down in Alabama. So we have the first right here. That's when rent is due, right? And then on the 5th, it's when rent becomes late. And then on the 7th, the way things work in Alabama is that my property manager places what they call a notice to vacate. And at this point in time, the tenant is going to choose what action they want to take, whether they want to pay the rent or just choose to do nothing, right? So if they choose to do nothing, what happens after day 7 is that my property manager will actually reach out and work with an attorney. And this attorney files in court something that is called an unlawful detainer action, and it's basically action that needs to be taken to legally evict someone either from the place that they're living in or from work. Then once this unlawful detainer action is filed in court, the tenant has an additional 7 days, right? Now we're talking about 7 plus 7, 14. So they have an additional 7 days to either show up to court or just simply do nothing once again, right? So if they show up to court, you can imagine how this is gonna go, right? You either, as the landlord, can have the option to just show up to court and defend yourself, which is something that I don't recommend unless you have experience handling cases like this or administering your property, you've gone through the proper channels to educate yourself. But for those who decide to not go to court themselves and they choose to send an attorney to represent them, you can actually, get a sense of what the math is going to look like, right? Attorneys, they charge somewhere between $100 to $200 to represent you. And we don't know how long you're actually going to stay in court until that tenant shows up and fights you, right? But in the event that the tenant chooses to do nothing, what's going to happen is that the deputy chief, right? Deputy chief, along with my property manager, in this case, along with property manager, they conduct the eviction process. Property management. So the deputy chief and the property manager, they conduct the eviction process. all their belongings are placed or taken outside of the property in itself. And when I asked them how much an average it costs for someone to go through an eviction process, he's saying, assuming the tenant doesn't fight back, assuming the tenant doesn't show up to court, on average, it costs $800 to evict somebody. But think about it this way. It's not just about the $800. We're talking about mental stress. We're talking about mental stress that is costing the tenant, and at the same time, it's mental stress that you as a real investor get, because once again, it's more than just, hey, they didn't pay rent and therefore I decide to evict them and I'm willing to place a family out in the streets. No, it's, hey, if I don't collect rent, does it mean I'm gonna have to foreclose on my investment? Does it mean I'm gonna have to lose the house? What's gonna happen to my credit if I don't pay or if I don't make that mortgage payment? So it's a lot more than the $800. This is just assuming that everything is going in an orderly fashion and that nothing gets delayed for more than a month. But imagine if things get delayed, or imagine if the tenant decides to appear in court and you have to hire an attorney. You're gonna start adding more money to this. So assuming that this is what it costs for 1 month, imagine if you have to go through this process for the entire 3 months. Now we're talking about $2,400. Now, if you add to that $2,400 attorney fees, we're talking somewhere between $500, $600, or even $700. So as you can see, evictions don't happen overnight, and it's more than just, hey, I just want to evict this person, right? An entire thoughtful process has to go through. You have to involve more than one party. In this case, you have to involve an attorney, your property manager, the deputy chief, so that everything is done properly and that you're respecting the rules of the rental contract and at the same time the laws, right? So that's all I have for you today. And in the event that you're actually wondering, hey, so how do I make sure I'm getting the right tenant? How do I make sure I'm placing the proper tenant so that I don't have to go through all of this headache as a real estate investor, and I'm not put in a position where I'm gonna have to, put a family out in the street? So for that reason, I selected this video right here that is gonna help you complement everything we talked about today, and hopefully will give you a better sense as to how to better qualify tenants, so that way it becomes a win-win situation for everybody. So that's all I have for today. Do not forget to hit the like button, and I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.